Okay. Alrighty, so we're stable at 14 at the moment, so let's go ahead and start. So Marc is the co-founder and chief marketing officer of UNBOX, which is actually UNBOX the Universe. But he's based in DC, in charge of developing the American market for their closed loop solutions. Before joining UNBOX, he worked as a strategy consultant at Brandhorn, which is in the Benelux, the largest independent marketing agency. William Arthey is a solutions engineer coordinating the product development cycle between sales and product teams, and he's based in the UK. Before UNBOX, he was a structural engineer at Waterman's in the UK. So without further ado, go ahead and Marc, comments, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd also like to introduce Eric, who I see pops into the call. Eric is the CEO of UNBOX, and he's coming straight from Antwerp, Belgium. Thanks for joining, Eric.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now and run you through a brief presentation. Now, this presentation is made to be
Marc,
interrupted.
Before you start, let me just give a little background on me here. The reason I wanted this to be shared with PCI was Marc approached me last October, maybe September, when we were getting ready for a StarTides demo, virtual demo at that point, and wanted to talk about UNBOX. And I said, all right, okay, what's this going to bring? Then we went. We shifted the StarTides this coming April and didn't do it in October. But I had a chance to meet with him and with Eric in DC. And the model they presented, namely having a closed loop system to actually enhance the ability of a donor or a government or whoever to get revenue for the purposes it was intended, and also to reduce waste, fraud, and abuse, really struck me as something that could be useful in a whole variety of applications, from AID to research and development to city planning to whatever. So anyway, I just thought it'd be useful for the group to hear it, because there's been so much talk within the PCI channels about community data for community good, and being able to understand better how to promote small and medium-sized enterprises, and then that this just struck me as an approach that could be valuable. So go ahead, Marc.
Thank you, Lynn. That's correct. And I actually chased Lynn for days and days in October, like insisting that he come in and talk to us, and he finally did. And I think it was actually a great turnout. So essentially, what I want to show you today is how we use closed loop systems to increase efficiency and transparency in funding distribution. Now, it's a mouthful, but just to give you an idea of what UNBOX was built for, essentially, like Lynn said, I started out in marketing with Eric, and I was working for Eric at Brandhome, a big marketing agency, and we always noticed one thing, is that when you look at marketing, 50% of the budget disappears. Now, this is a complaint that lots of companies have, but we realize this is not just restricted to marketing. Essentially, anytime organizations distribute funding for a particular purpose, they have no good tools to, one, distribute said funding, and two, analyze how efficient it was distributed. So we created a platform on which organizations can essentially build, like Lego plates, their own funding distribution systems and provide efficient funding distribution to the intended recipient. Now, all this happens through closed loop networks. Now, as a company, we're really a purpose-driven company. Just it's important to know, we believe that we can rebuild better societies with better funding distribution, and we want to keep evil out of money. Now, if I had 30 seconds to tell you what UNBOX does, that would be the line I would say. I would say, keep evil out of money. Because money itself is not evil, but when it's distributed, a lot of people stand as middlemen, and a lot of misallocation and misuse actually bring that evil inside. Now, what we're building is actually the first low no-code platform. Think of it like a website builder, like a WordPress, a Wix, or even a word processor. Essentially a platform on which anybody can create a funding distribution scheme and distribute small or big amounts of funding with the purpose to a set of recipients. Now, of course, I don't need to tell you why this is an issue. I think all of you guys here know the issue in and out. You know the problems that come with funding distribution. We identified it as twofold: leakage and slippage. Essentially, leakage being money being taken out of a funding distribution scheme and used for an unintended purpose. Now, I lived 2 years in Belgium, and I would need, I think, way more than an hour of your time to tell you all the times I've heard about someone abusing a welfare system, abusing unemployment, pretending to have more children than they do to get more allocations, Essentially, people abusing government money for a nefarious purpose. Now, that's one thing. Slippage is the other side of the distribution coin, so to say. Slippage is all the money that stays stagnant in these systems and essentially is noxious to all parties involved. Now, for example, when you look at a FEMA budget for a reconstruction effort, if the whole budget is not used within a certain period, then the budget will get lowered. Now, this is very inconvenient for the people actually using that budget, and there's no currently a good way to be able to track how well you're on and make sure that all the money is being spent. Now, that's one side of the issue. The other side, and I think you guys know this too, is all the analysis. How do you track efficiently how well of a job or how good of a job you're doing in giving away money? If you're a government, if you're an NGO, even if you're a company, there's no tools to actually be able to say, okay, this is how good we're doing. The money's reaching these people is being spent on this and that. And this is also the places where it's not being spent and where we have to put more emphasis, right? These are issues that we have no solution currently to. Well, there is one. It's called EY or Deloitte, and they cost a lot of money and they sit in your office for months. And, it's not very cost efficient. The other solution is putting a junior analyst on Excel, and he spends his evenings going crazy trying to do all the reporting and all the accounting for where the money goes. What we do is actually solve these two issues in one integrated solution. And it works with essentially the carrot and the stick. So we work with conditional behavior, unconditional behavior, unconditional rewards, and conditional rewards. Essentially, we mix two different things. How do you steer behavior, and how do you adapt rewards to essentially further steer that behavior in the direction you want it to be steered to? Now, if I want to explain in one sentence or in one short, paragraph how it works, it would be like this. Essentially, when you look at funding distribution schemes today, they suffer from a lot of dilution because of the way money moves. So in a traditional system, the benefactor would give cash to the beneficiary, who would then go spend it out of business or any vendors for whatever they want. But it's during this movement from benefactor to beneficiary to business that all the dilution occurs. Essentially, the misallocation, the slippage, the leakage, the fraud, and of course, the lack of traceability. So what we do essentially is close the circle. That's how we create a closed loop. Instead of giving directly fiat or cash to a beneficiary, we give them U-coins. Now, U-coins, and I'll go a bit more in depth later on what they are, they function as a digital value proxy. Essentially, they're not money. They're not a value holder, but rather they're a value carrier. And with that value carrier, you can essentially, as a benefactor, decide where they can be spent and who receives them. You have much more control over where your funding is going and how efficiently it's being distributed, because you can direct purchasing power to the intended purpose. Now, the real money, the cash backing the U-coins, actually never leaves the benefactor's bank account. It only moves from the benefactor's bank account to the business's bank account once the U-coins have been spent. So it's the same model as a clearinghouse. And what it allows you to do is twofold. First of all, you don't have all these big spikes in your cash flow when you're giving away or partaking in big funding distribution programs, because money is only paid out as it's being spent, and unspent money is never paid out. Second of all, and that's very important to understand, UNBOX as an entity in this whole value chain never holds any of the value. It never holds any of the money being distributed. So whether you would use our platform to give away $10 or give away $10 billion, we would never see a cent of it. Now, this is very interesting in terms of a compliance and a regulatory standpoint, because we don't have to be audited in the same way as a company like a voucher provider that actually holds the money and sends the vouchers in exchange. Now, I speak about a U-coin and a closed loop system, but what exactly is a U-coin? This is important to understand. A U-coin is not a currency, and this is key in terms of understanding how our system works. Like I said earlier, it's a value proxy. So it doesn't hold the value, but it carries it. It doesn't function as a store of wealth. Whereas a euro, a pound, or a dollar, you can save up for a couple of years and then buy yourself a trip to Bora Bora with it. Same with Bitcoin, if someone accepts it. You can't do that with U-coins. Why not? Because the U-coins actually are able to be programmed with business rules that affect their value depending on whatever parameter you want to set up. So this can be as simple as saying on March 25th, your U-coins expire. Now, all of you have an incentive to go spend them before March 25th. Now, this has been done before we know, but we can take it a step further. We can change the value of a Ucoin depending on very precise parameters, such as location, time, even the weather. You can use Ucoins and decide to make a system where Ucoins have 25% more purchasing power if you spend them at locally owned business on rainy weekdays, for example. And in that way, we're able actually to steer behavior to the direction we want it to be steered, or the direction that the benefactor wants it to be steered. Now, on top of that, Ucoins are not tradable. And that's very important. There's no exchange for a Ucoin to be exchanged for euros or pounds. No, Ucoins can only be used for their intended purpose, and most importantly, by the intended recipient. You see, I can't send Lynn my Ucoins, nor can he send me his. They only have value to the person for whom they were intended, and they can only be spent by that person on the pre-approved spending categories. Now, if you want to situate us in that whole scheme of different spending mechanisms, we sit between fiat currency and between marketing and loyalty units. And we're sitting, of course, far away from the cryptocurrency. Just to be clear, Ucoin is not a cryptocurrency. Though we have blockchain technology, we do not function as a cryptocurrency. And on top of that, we don't function as e-money. This is another very interesting thing in terms of a regulatory perspective. Legally, we're closer to a voucher, much closer to a voucher than we are to cryptocurrency. Now, like I said, it's a value proxy. Essentially, it provides everybody involved full transparency of where cash is going, to the funding provider, to the rightful recipient. And again, all individuals are treated as the only recipient of their allocated funding, and they can decide what's purchased. Now, the spending categories are controlled, but it's flexible. Essentially, you can decide where you want Ucoins to be spent, whether you want it to be spent at local business, whether you want it to be spent on contractors for a reconstruction effort. Essentially, you decide what merchants are allowed into the closed loop system, and these are the only merchants where money can be spent. And of course, you can target where you want it to go. Now, the whole system, the closed loop system, is configurable, and this is very important. So essentially, you decide as a funding party whether you want to give Ucoins or you want them to be earned. So giving them is in the context of, for example, a humanitarian aid program, a universal basic income, of which we believe in, or as a reward for loyalty. But you can also earn them by doing some sort of social good. For example, in Belgium right now, we have 6 cities where people living in those cities can actually earn Ucoins if they pick up litter and throw it out. This is an example of social participation. But of course, we can have all these validation methods be done for whatever. It could be you get a reward for eating healthy. It could be you get a reward for supporting local business, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the spending happens in a configurable ecosystem of merchants, of reward partners. Now, again, I want to really emphasize that the actual money backing the Ucoin always sits either in the benefactor's account or in a trust account that's held by the benefactor. Now, you may ask, what's the ratio for one Ucoin to $1 or £1 or €1? Well, it's completely configurable. Essentially, the Ucoin is a very arbitrary unit in of itself, and you can decide how you want to peg it. You can have it to be 1 to 1, you can have it to be 1 to 100. It doesn't really matter. And again, once the Ucoins have been spent, the real money is paid out directly on the back end to the merchant. Now, the interesting thing about our solution is that it doesn't require a lot of software or a lot of knowledge to be used. We're actually firm believers in what's called web apps or progressive applications. Essentially, the belief that we don't want all our applications to only be usable through the App Store or through the Google Play Store. On the contrary, we make everything available just through the internet, which means that as a user, a recipient, or as a merchant, you can access and use our system, receive and spend Ucoins through your web browser. So you don't need to have the latest iPhone or the latest Samsung or smartphone to be able to use it. Any phone with an internet connection, just like any tablet or any computer with an internet connection, is enough to use our system, both as a merchant and as a recipient. Everything actually happens through QR code transactions, and it's incredibly simple. All you have to do as a merchant is type the amount of money that's being paid for, and then it creates a QR code, and then as a recipient, you just scan the QR code and you're done. Now, we can go through our market and essentially who we work with, but I think you can already imagine there's a lot of applications for this. Governments, NGOs, even brands and companies come to us because they have funding they need to spend for a particular purpose, whether that be humanitarian aid, recovery money, stimulus, or even loyalty money. And we give them the guarantee that if they use our platform, they will only be guarantee that the money will go to the intended recipient, whether that's a citizen, whether that's a customer, an employee, refugee, it doesn't matter. We guarantee the money reaches the intended recipient, and we also provide the ability to not only incentivize certain behaviors, but also all the data feedback. We provide an integrated live feedback showing exactly where the money is being spent, on what, at what time, how, at what frequency, et cetera, allowing the benefactor to have a very clear and quantitatively informed idea of how efficiently and how well his funding distribution system is going. Now, this whole thing functions on our platform, CLX. Essentially, CLX, like I said, is the low no-code platform for closed-loop funding schemes. So at this moment, we are the ones who are implementing these funding schemes because, how can I say, when you start a company and when you start a new idea, you've got to educate the market a little bit. I think you guys know this. So we have to be the implementators and hold hands to the people who use our platform for now. But of course, as we're developing, people start understanding the patterns and then they can use it themselves. But the ultimate goal is to provide a platform we don't have to put our hands on. The only thing we have to be careful of is, of course, all the ethics of what this can be used. Because we're providing a platform on which you can incentivize behavior. And we want it to be good behavior. Now, how do we define good? That's a very hard question. Right now, it's the person giving away the money that defines what behaviors to be incentivized. But ultimately, there'll have to be some sort of checks and balances. Now, I want to go through with all of you what examples we have so far for use cases of closed loop systems. These are all products that we've deployed in the market and that we're actively using as a proof point for closed loop systems. But don't be fooled. This is just some applications of how a closed loop system can be applied. There are countless other ways, going from spending, campaign spending, health insurance, even credit export agencies, pocket money, that we haven't approached yet. But of course, it wouldn't be the right approach for us as a small team, we're 33, it's still a small team, to actually go and become experts in all these fields. On the contrary, what we do is we show these use cases as a proof point, and then we build the platform and the tooling so that the experts in the respective fields can create their own use cases. Now, what we do with litter, and this is currently in Belgium and it's actually incredibly successful, is actually using a closed loop system to reward people who pick up litter. So it's very simple. You go into the app, which is an app on the App Store, but also a web app. So you don't need to have the latest iPhone. When you see some trash or some litter on the street, you can pick it up. If there's a barcode, you can scan it. If there's no barcode, you can take a picture and then throw it out. Now we run a whole suite of checks behind with computer vision, location, time to see and identify fraud. If all passes, then you get a reward in circular unicoins because we're rewarding circular economies. These circular unicoins, you can then go on to spend on an integrated eShop that gives you special items, discounts, free items with participating merchants within the ecosystem. Now, what's interesting about this, and I think key to what UNBOX does on the behavioral side, is that it doesn't just rely on goodwill. It doesn't just rely on intrinsic motivation. On the contrary, we say you want to reward extrinsic motivation, a small economic incentive that actually goes a long way to change the behavior. Because if you only stick to intrinsic motivation, then you end up only addressing a small segment of the population that's already going out of their way to do the right thing. But we want to address, 90% of the adoption curve. We want this to work for families going on a walk, for students, wanting to get a discount on the next beer, et cetera, et cetera. So what we do essentially is we add that small economic nudge, and suddenly it's not just a very ecologically engaged people doing it, it's everybody doing it. If I were to put it in one sentence, we use economic incentives to actually get the individual interest to collide, or I guess join with the collective interest. Now, we've launched this across Belgium and it's been a huge success. We have a very thriving ecosystem of merchants accepting Ucoins in exchange for discounts, for items. And of course, we got the big guys like Coca-Cola and Burger King who do it. And let's not lie to each other. These guys, they just do it because they want a good ESG story to push out to the communications sector and feel good about it. But the more interesting segment of the merchants we have is actually those small shops, which I'm sure none of you have heard about, but like the Antwerp Bowling Club. They sign up and they offer discounts on bowling sessions, but what it means for them is actually a completely free marketing channel that they can use to get more footfall, more business, and more revenue. And essentially, not only do we help clean up cities, but we also, in parallel and simultaneously, stimulate the local economy. Now, again, everything we do is backed by in-depth data. And this, I think you'll find funny. We know exactly in Belgium which brand has its name on the most litter strewn across the floor in the cities of Belgium. Now, like I said, on the 20th of January, we had 14,500 users, 35,000 litter pickups confirmed, 4,400 merchants, 8.5 tons of CO2 saved from the atmosphere, and about 5 tons of litter picked up. What this does essentially is change the perception on a consumer level of what litter is. Because you look at it on before, and people say, oh, this is litter, it's meant to be thrown out, it has no value. Now, on the business side of things, we all know that PET and PET recycling has an immense amount of value, but this hasn't caught up on the consumer side. That's what we're doing. Changing the perception and saying, okay, this actually has value. And I would even go further and say it's not just litter pickup, it's urban mining. That's a better word for it. Now, all this is completely powered by our software UNBOX Litter and its white label, meaning we can deploy it in any city, in any stadium, in any festival, college, whatever you can name. This can come right out of the box. And we're working really hard to make this start in America. Me and Eric are just back from Puerto Rico, where we had some very promising conversations with different stakeholders there on actually getting this as a tool to not only clean up the island and make it a more attractive location, but also stimulate local business. Now, looking at what we're doing with local stimulus, and I think this is what can interest you the most, it's called Unbox Your City. And essentially, we started this with Antwerp. The city of Antwerp, and this was in early 2021, was trying to give away a stimulus check to its employees and to some of its citizens. It was actually 300 euros per person. But here's the catch. They wanted that stimulus check to be able or to be usable only on local business so that they could make the claim that all the government money was going directly to stimulate local business. Now, the issue with this is that when you give people money in a period of economic uncertainty, the reflex is not just to spend it at your local coffee shop, which is understandable. The reflex you have when you don't know what's around the corner is going to be to either save it or spend it at Amazon or at Walmart for food and water. Now, that's a fine reflex, but when the money is specifically intended to stimulate the local economy, that can't happen. But with our Ucoin, with the solution, we actually managed to make a closed loop system where all the money coming from the government, given in the form of Antwerp and Ucoins, could only be spent at local business. Now, how do you define a local business? This is something we do in tandem with the funding party, with the benefactor. So it had to be less than 25 full-time employees, a cap in revenue, no locations outside of Antwerp, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the onboarding for the merchant is very simple. All they have to do is put in their tax ID, their name, and their business's name. And then we do all the checking on the back end and automatically onboard them or deny because they're not eligible. Now, for the people participating, essentially the recipients, the government can batch upload all the recipients they want to have on the system, and then they're automatically onboarded. But here's the catch, and here's why. In 6 months of operations, we managed to have 2,000 plus merchants accepting Antwerp and Ucoin in Antwerp. The system is completely free for merchants to sign up and doesn't have any transaction fees. Now, this is key because when you go to a small merchant, especially an SME, and you tell them, here's another parallel monetary system, the first thing they think of is, oh, another system that's going to take a commission that's actually going to, take a cut out of my already small revenue. We don't think like that. We don't make money on usage. We actually charge the government a flat fee per subscribed user per month. That way we can make the system completely free for merchants to sign up and use. So, then the communications line for them is very simple. Sign up, it's free, you get more business. And when I mean more business, I mean it seriously. On average, in 6 months, the SMEs who participated made about 5,000 to 6,000 extra euros in revenue for that 6 months period. On the outliers on the top end, one made 100,000 extra euros, 10 made 70,000 extra euros, and then 50 made actually 60,000 extra euros. Now, I don't need to tell you that for a small business, that kind of money is the difference between, closing down shop and actually making it for another year. On top of that, we actually did something very interesting in using those business rules that I mentioned earlier. So you'll see on this slide that 6.6 million euros was distributed through the system. However, 12.4 million euros was injected into the local economy. Now, how did this happen? How did the money double? Well, we added a business rule that said, very simply, you can't pay for the entirety of the bill in Antwerp coins. Actually, you can pay for 66% in Antwerp coins and 33 in euros, or if you're a citizen, 50% and 50% in euros. Now, what that allowed was actually to activate local savings and get citizens and employees of the city to match or cost match the amount of money put in by the city. This means we almost doubled the amount of money invested in the program, resulting in 12.4 million euros injected in the local economy. Now, for the city, this was great because they had the claim that was verifiable, backed by very hard evidence that all the money they were putting in the system was going in the local economy. And not only that, that it was growing in the local economy. Again, this is something we built for Antwerp, but we have all the software licensed to us. We own it and we can deploy it in any city, in any college campus, whatever you may think of. So I'll go through one more thing that we're doing with health, because I think this is also interesting. And me and Lynn had a very good conversation 2 weeks ago about food deserts in Washington, D.C. and how we can help them. And it's actually called Unboxed Wellbeing. Essentially, what that does is take the concept of a closed loop system and apply it to health and well-being. Namely, we reward people who eat healthy with increased purchasing power. So we've already run this in Belgium with Deleuze, which is actually the same company that owns Food Giant, the Food Lion, et cetera, in the US. And how we structured it was as something called the Healthy Membership Program. Essentially a subscription program where employers would pay for their employees to have a discount on healthy food. So it's great. Essentially, as an employer, you pay €5 per month per employee, and that gives your employee 60 euros off per month if they choose to buy healthy. Now, how do you define healthy? Well, in Europe, we have something called the Nutri-Score. Essentially, it's a rating system from A to E that rates the nutritional value and the health qualities of a certain foodstuff. If you bought food with a rating of A or B, you got a discount. If you bought eggs, milk, vegetables, you got a discount. Anything apart from that, you did not get a discount. Now, we managed to get 33% of people to start eating healthier. So 1 in 3 of the people using this product actually changed their behavior for the better. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now, and I think I'm going to open up for questions because I guess you get the idea, and it's a lot of information, and please do ask away. I'm happy to answer other questions.
Okay. Lynn, but as we go into Q&A, I thought I would give you a moment to just provide a bridge in your thinking about Unbox and other applications that you've been thinking about, because you've been considering this for some time. You're on mute.
Thanks very much, Kevin. The Antwerpian model really struck me as an interesting use case, if you will. But as you say, one can imagine one of the conversations I had with the finance minister of Afghanistan some years ago was that, he figured that 70% of the money that started into the top of the kleptocracy funnel in Kabul never made it to the intended user. And so if you actually had some, you have to get it into the hands of a responsible donor or responsible disperser. But if you could have something like this, the amount of diversion of the funds could be significantly reduced. And one of the things that Marc had told me earlier, I think he was using an estimate, and please correct me, of something like 6% for fraud, misuse, and most of that actually came from merchants trying to pose as legitimate merchants to get into the system rather than diversion from the recipients of the Ucoins.
Wow.
Anyway, so one can imagine this for AID, one can imagine it for community development, one can imagine it for, checking to see how is your research and development funding actually going to projects that wind up producing results, all sorts of things. And so what I'd really value from the PCI audience here is their views of some of the alternative uses for this, and also for a better understanding of how the system works. So
thanks, Lynn. Appreciate it. I mean, I look at this as being an alternative philanthropic, economy that you're creating with a currency that, supports it. We've seen a lot of things where there's fraud, waste, and abuse associated with charitable contributions not getting to stated mission and purpose. So I'm going to get to Ben. He had some questions, but my question is, what would prevent UCoin from, the same issues, right? Because if you create an alternative economy, that economy could be subject to fraud, waste, and abuse. Right. So what are the design parameters that allow it to function, in a way that has, the good intentions that you propose? And Mark, William, and Eric, we're delighted to have you with us. So what do you think there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a very valid question, but the whole design of a closed loop is actually intended to insulate it from any chances of fraud that could happen, because there's no actual money being passed down to the beneficiary. So by doing this, we remove essentially the big choke point that happens when you're giving cash away to someone and hoping that they spend it on a particular purpose. That's the key part. And on top of that, I think Will has something to say. Yeah, go ahead, Will.
Yeah, so one of the things which, I think your question is kind of steering around, if the funder decides to plan to create the closed loop to steer it in the wrong direction, then they could still do that. But for the really impact-driven projects, what's really important there is why we're looking into the blockchain, because even though it isn't a cryptocurrency and still not tradable, as Mark said, you can still have it on the blockchain, so we can still use the trust which having it on a distributed ledger can give you. So if it was for a project in Afghanistan or something, all of the data on the transactions could still be out, generating that trust of where the money's going. So you can still have the trust there of removing the fraud, while still having the efficiency for the funder.
But what I see that Kevin is saying, I don't know if you guys see me because I can't see myself.
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
I had to put my camera on and off
there
again. If it works then.
Yes, there you are.
Yep. What Kevin is saying, of course, is I think a very valid question and something on which we really have to spend some more time explaining why, because it is in essence the reason that we have built what we have built. Technically, the moment you dissociate storage of value with the carriage of value, what we do, we put it apart. You actually, if you even would be able to steal it, you steal an empty box. We have 3 technology platforms on which we are working, which all 3 have their own reasons to perfectly function. And also, there's a lot of tech reasons. However, and there I think that's what the point that Kevin makes, we need to be very well aware that every system that you build at a certain moment can be frauded.
Right. Well, you're kind of functionally like in the energy industry, you're functionally like hydrogen, that you're not actually energy, but you are a transfer conduit, right, for something being delivered.
Actually, Kevin, we are a value proxy.
Okay, well,
the reason why I bring it up and why I find your question very relevant is because 5 to 10% of the fundraising that we're organizing to then move our HQ into DC is going to be earmarked specifically to solve that issue. Why? Because we don't know how we have to do it. It has never been done. Nobody never put the fraud compliance system on a CLS because you consider it as being unbreakable. However, you see, there is a lot of product fraud. That what you see, I was 3 weeks ago, I was on the West Bank and I was in Jordan in the refugee camps. The biggest problem that you see there, and just to ask you a question, do you know what the gross domestic product is that the refugee in Jordan makes? So if you have a refugee sitting in a camp or whatever support within the Jordanian borders, do you know what it brings on a yearly basis?
No. No.
So this is plus $20,000 per head. So these are big amounts of money. And when I was going around there, even the Jordanian government, to avoid whatever wrong things that might happen with money, has a very solid track how you can move money in and out of the country. Also, the US is looking very closely at that because the US is the largest donator, puts 2 to 3 billion a year in. So what we want to do is build a new type of compliance, which is a compliance which I'm not so worried that you have fraud in terms of the transactions and the holding, because the cash flow is fully reversed. I am much more concerned in what I call secondary and tertiary fraud of product. Currently, you see it, for example, I will give you a primary example of fraud, is these prepaid credit cards they put money on. In the beginning, you could go to the ATM and take the money out of the wall. Now they block that. You can go to specific merchants, including big chains. You pay, but actually you say, you know what, I'm buying for 100 bucks, 10 bucks products, but actually you only take 4 bucks, and the 6 bucks you forget about it, and you split the fraud with the participating merchant. This is not possible in our system. So this is primary level of fraud. But secondary and tertiary could be possible in all kinds of thoughts. So that is what we call cash fingerprinting solutions, where you want to work on. So is the system fully unbreakable? No, it never is. So far, has it not been broken? Touching wood, no, it has not been broken. But the reason why I was last weekend, and that's why I'm a bit tired, because I had a 22-hour trip back from Puerto Rico, and I'm going back to DC on Saturday to Belgium. I was with Marc in Puerto Rico. I was 3 weeks ago in Jordan on the West Bank, in that area. We have people working in Africa. The reason why we go there, I had to explain to our board of directors, so I'll explain to you guys too. When you have built a supercar, a very good car, then you test it on the track, you test it on all kinds of roads, you take it to the Indy 500, but where do you finally take it before you go into mass volume? You take it into the desert, and you take it into Alaska. You take it into conditions that normal software should never go. So that is one of the reasons why we're also looking to operate in these countries. I can talk hours about technological limitations, conditions that specific army or network supplies, which mostly of them are in those areas military controlled for all obvious and good reasons, are there. So is it breakable? No, nobody says that. But it is the best system that we have seen so far.
Thank you, Eric.
I hope that gives explanation to what
it's good. I mean, I just naturally skeptical anytime anything new gets created. Ben, you had some great comments, thoughts in chat. Please join us.
Yeah, no, it was very interesting model, and the notion of a tighter controlled ledger loop that has blockchain-based immutable recording, and then the sharing. I had some questions about I see it more as a one-time use, one-time transfer. Otherwise, you are getting into exchange of ledger representation. And so I see it as a smart contract embedded that allows me to set controls and restrictions on geofencing, on conditions of exercise and use, on temporal use, temporal viability of an offering. So there's a lot of interesting, in a disciplined fashion, you can set a purposeful set of controls, control mechanisms. And then you have the issue too, there's a will of the sponsor that how much can they know? And the anonymity is degree to which you preserve anonymity, the degree to which you sacrifice that for compliance, and is an interesting issue. And so I would see your offering as offering a templated 4, 5, 6 models, not let it be proscribed by your customer organization, because they could just completely wipe out any sense of anonymity of the individual as well. as a part of it if it tracks completely in a blockchain, completely traceable from end to end. And I was curious about the one time. My observation that it's a one-time exercise in use, so that there is not a transfer of value from one to another that could be further exercised. It's a log use and exercise. So the cash happens to the merchant as the transaction takes place. Is that fair, Mark?
Yeah, that's fair. That's actually exactly what it is, Ben.
And I like everything except for the corporate extortion NFT part. I'm just saying, I'm from Chicago.
Yeah.
I'm from Chicago. We know extortion.
Corporate extortion.
I think you were talking about the brand shaming.
Yeah. Is that what you call it? In Chicago, we call it extortion.
Well,
Sounds nice.
yeah, that could come back and bite you at some point, that, that the entry into this was negative and that you've embedded inside those large organizations a reason to want to decouple from you at the first opportunity, because they entered via pain as opposed to, some other mechanism. So that's just a potential issue.
Yeah, fair enough.
Tony. Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
So, thanks. It's a great conversation. It's really interesting. So, yeah, can you speak a little bit about the privacy of the individuals? I mean, what considerations? Ben actually, kind of touched a little bit about the, what should I say? Just the anonymity, component of it.
Absolutely. Well, then I'd like to start by saying that, as a company that started in Europe and in Belgium specifically, we built our whole technical infrastructure around the highest standard of GDPR compliance. Mm-hmm. So all the data we own is black box. It's not accessible. It even sits outside of Belgium because we didn't want essentially to be asked to show it in case. And again, the data we provide to, for example, the city of Antwerp is going to be aggregate data, big numbers, not specific user behavior. Now, of course, the question of how much do we know and essentially what's the price tag on it is always going to come up. And I can tell you, after having spoken to a lot of New York, Excel jockey kind of investors, the kind, you've seen them too many times, right? They say, well, what are you going to do with the data? So far, we do not intend to commercialize or profit off the data of the people using our system at all. We don't need to. Now, you might say so far, but we don't need it in terms of our business model to run successfully. And we're not pre-revenue. We're actually a profitable company that's run just actually on charging based on users, not on usage or data. Again, when you look at it in the US, data protection laws are different. And there has to be a mechanism put in place to be essential to essentially offer a viable trade-off for users. You accept the trackable money, what do you get in exchange? Either it's an opt-in, opt-out system where you get more rewards if you accept to be further, to have your data used in some way. But there has to be a system that, to be fully transparent, is not in place yet for the US market.
And I mean, just to add on that a little bit, I mean, we think that citizens are becoming a lot more aware about their data and the fact that they don't want it to be shared, which means that the regulations we think will follow, with it being a lot stricter. So I think it'd be one of the worst things for the company would be for us to become reliant on that. So we want to stay very far away from any possible reliance on data, which is why we don't monetize it at the moment. And we're very wary about monetizing it going forward.
So that's interesting, with the recent moves with Apple, right? The impact with Apple and their data tracking, opt out, and its impact on Facebook, So, and I believe from the last reading is only, I think, 18% of perhaps Apple users have actually exercised that opt out feature, but that is definitely becoming more of a conversation, right? Than people. I mean, it just wasn't an option, a few years ago. So
can I because I see that John has also a question. Can I have a remark on that one too? I think first of all, personally, I'm a big believer that next to clean water and clean air, which are conditions for a healthy environment, the right to be forgotten or privacy is a basic human right, which today is being abused by many powerful large organizations, that when you see the entire situation, how social media giants are reacting to what's happening in Ukraine, shows that at least they have not their governance and compliance under control, how you have to deal with that. So this is one. Secondly, as my two colleagues explained, although a lot of VC companies find it important that we monetize data, so far, our entire system does not monetize data even more. It's actually a privacy first built. It means the right to be forgotten is built in. Why is that? It's because technically in Europe, because of the GDPR legislation, that with the exception of California is far more complex than the US one, not on the fine side, but on the complexity side. So I also believe that what Tony is saying, at the moment that embarks on the US side with the, let's say the common law system with big fines, then we are going to see the world really moving, but it is not there yet. So whatever we do, we put privacy first. That being said, it falls into two buckets. When you distribute third-party funding, our privacy protocols need to follow what the third party that gives the money wants the privacy to be. If you give money, you are entitled to know or to set or whatever you agree with to say this is the standard that I need to check, because simply knowing that the fact that I give money to this organization is not used to kill somebody through an NGO, I think that is my right for me to give to this NGO. It's so that's I think one of the parameters you need to put forward, who actually pays, plays, and decides on that. This being said, we are working on a different solution on the privacy side, because the moment that I believe that you have income, you pay tax, it's your own money. From there on, we are building actually a different Ucoin. It's not called a Ucoin. We are building a solution that is completely untraceable. Now, when you look today at privacy, we have looked globally to build it in through technology. It hasn't worked because we find loopholes. We have tried to build it in through regulatory. That also doesn't work because it has loopholes. So we are currently building, but this is happening in our lab. It's in a lab phase, and it's not for third-party funding. It's for personal funding, which is not in the market yet. And it's something that is for me very close to my heart, because I have two young girls, one from 11 and one from 14, that I have to explain the danger of data, but they don't understand it. Now, you guys and we, perhaps I think the other ones I don't see, I think we are all plus 50. We know how dangerous it is, data. Also, there is a direct correlation, for example, in Western Europe between suicide of children under the age of 15 and the full usage of data. Of course, nobody wants to put this out there because legally we cannot. There's European, what we call Pax Media, which means you do not report on some topics which might trigger negative behavior. Being said, all the youngsters that kill themselves, so suicide themselves. So this is a very broad explanation, but because Tony asks it, these guys, they know that this is for me one of my big things. Yeah. How do you deal with privacy in third-party funding versus how do you deal with privacy in your personal life? In third-party funding, just to be very clear, what we say is we give the data information to the third party that funds. We don't give it to anybody else. That is why we can't use it as a business model. And that is something that the guys on Wall Street don't understand. Yeah. Because then it becomes a dangerous game.
Yeah. Very good. Tony, that was a good question. Eric.
Sorry to get dragged on.
No, it's all right. We greatly appreciate that kind of engagement. John Wharton.
Yeah, well, hey, Mark, good to see you. And thanks everyone, Eric and William, Mark, for the great brief. I really appreciate it. Very, very insightful. I just wanted to circle back with a couple of Lynn's comments and then just more stimulating thought, not necessarily a question and answer.
Okay.
But a lot of the different areas I think you address where other uses are, and certainly you've addressed, there's government, there's non-government, but where I could have very much valued help. I certainly was involved in the Afghanistan, the whole 9 yards there, and how we then went Northern Distribution Network and used money as really a battlefield operating system to influence, but there was no control. And still, if I were to go to the government, the Army still and the Department of Defense cannot account for all their audits and all their spending. Now, those are enterprise levels, but a couple of things I just wanted to comment on, again, for food for thought, not necessarily one thing's going on right now that I think would have been very helpful is the evolution from, and I wrote a couple articles on it, was the broker trading on PPE, vaccinations, and the distribution of that. And what you had here, theoretically, you should have a buyer, a seller, and then a financier. It should be that streamlined. But in the PPE world, when all this craziness was happening, you had many people inserting themselves in between the processes, and were trying to flip personal property, or PPE or vaccinations and things of that nature. So that point end is one area that is still ongoing, that really needs some governance and some systematic solutions. So that would be one area that is happening, because we're still going to do global distribution of vaccinations, global distribution of medical supplies and things like that. So, and some of those are with exactly the right organizations you talked about, whether the UN, whether the USAID, and we have those connections. We just don't have the system in place to execute that. So exactly there, but all the distribution, global distribution, and humanitarian distribution of products. The one of the things that you hit on, and I really do appreciate it, because I used to always talk about accountability, responsibility, then authority. And in your case, you made me think about the validation. So we have a buyer, we have a seller, for lack of, in simplicity terms, and then there's a governance function here. How do you, and this is a question, how do you ensure that the person who performs the act is fairly compensated, or that he really does complete the act? It's one thing if a company sends, here's an invoice to you, hey, you're going to invoice me. But when the model that you talked about in Antwerp, here's a guy who picks up, he takes a picture, that's very low. How do you ensure the service is performed from the systems that you have? That's just one thing that I like to just understand a little bit better. And then here you are as a company, then here's the governance. It goes back to the question that was just asked, the governance over the system. We trust you, but there's still got to be governance when you start to go outside that and you start dealing with countries and their rules and like we're saying, security. So just comments there for thought.
But in our next fundraising round, that problem, the last topic, we have to solve it, because for that you actually need a set of compliance that actually controls the controller. Yeah. We don't have that in place. It's I can give as arguments that many solutions, actually all the solutions in the world, don't have it in place, but that's not an argument, because that doesn't solve the issue. So the reality is, John, we don't have it in place. Do we have ideas how to do it? Yes. Have we get our head around that? No. Do we have the budget to do that now? No. That's your second question. The first question, that's the easier one, because that we control. We use, depending on the application, we have various ways of checking. The Antwerp one, both the buyer and the seller need to take a picture of the ticket. That's one. Secondly, in the beginning, because we thought there was going to be more fraud, we asked them also to take a picture of what they bought, that we can read out. But it actually turned out that we actually had no fraud at all. Mm-hmm. That's the strange part. So we let that one going. We kept the ticket one that we fully read out. On what is related to the pickup of the litter, we have 4 to 7% fraud. For me, I consider fraud. You try to scan it twice. You don't throw it in. You try to do it in a supermarket, stuff like that. The advantage why it doesn't play so much there is because it gives your purchasing power increase at a specific destination. So even if somebody would fraud, the expense is marginal. Of course, that is not a reason, John, why we should not look for solutions. So we are looking for solutions with more intelligence to read it out. Currently, on the business side, we don't have any fraud. Where we saw that we had fraud is when we used the Antwerp system to motivate people to book hotel rooms. We booked more than 40,000 additional hotel rooms, dragging people into the city and say, hey, if you book a hotel room and you pay, I think the hotel room per night had to be at least, I think, 150 euros per night. You had to pay 75 euro yourself. There you see that people try to fraud, try to book into a hotel and try to check out of a hotel, working together with, let's say, Airbnbs and organizations like that. So for that, we on our, let's say, KYC, know your customer, that we have on everybody using it, but also we call it KYP, know your partner. There we build improvements into the system. For me, the fraud exists much more on the business where you can pay it than that it is with the people that use it, strangely enough. That is where the security level lies.
No, very, very good. And thank you very much, Eric. I just, as you look at all the different areas, you got the personal use, you got enterprise levels and all the different levels, you got all the different processes you can affect. Right now, I'm concerned about the Buy Back Better plan in the United States, right? Or Build Back Better, because there's a lot of money that's being put into multiple infrastructure projects. And then I've already, worried about when the money is supposed to go for different causes and how do we ensure it gets to the right point. And then again, like I think Ben said about some of the use of blockchain, and Mark, you commented on that, but that's a lot of money for a lot of projects. And I'm concerned about that we have the right governance in place, because I haven't seen that even in the United States on the existing processes with all, for example, the accelerators that are out there that are buying our R&D to try to keep us competitive. There's not good mechanisms in place for what are we spending, what are we buying.
John, can I react to that very openly? You have a military background, I suppose. Huh?
Yeah.
I was in Puerto Rico walking on the beach together with Mark and someone who I'm working with who is a former US Navy SEAL. And we're just discussing types of leadership, because I made a remark that the best global CEOs I worked for whatever reason, all happened to be former military special operations. So Mark asked me why. I said, because you know what the word of trust and honesty means. It's something that in normal corporate life, you don't learn it. It's a lot of politics and backstabbing. Nobody knows that backstabbing, you can take it literally into war. So you have to be very, very careful. Now, this being said, a lot of people, they don't want money to get traceable. I think that's the answer to the question. There are actually more people that don't want it than people that want it. And that is where it gets complex. When you look at specific markets, including my own in Belgium, where we have a history of frauding, because the reason why I actually started building this company is because I know that we need to, if we want to rebuild better societies, we need better fund distribution. The problem is I pay 56% tax, but I don't see any upside of that. And that is when people start hiding and start playing. Building, I had a discussion with the governor of Puerto Rico. I said the 0% tax status, I don't think that's very interesting, because people that don't pay taxes are people that don't value community service. So that's my point of view. I think that 30% tax should be the max. And I think if we do efficient tax distribution, that's how we started, we should be able to do it with 30%. I have no problem paying to help a single mom or people that are together, or a child that gets cancer. And I can tell you everything about Protection Gap. I did 25 years in the insurance business. I know how that works. But I have a big problem if that's not transparent. Because the next phase that we are going to build is that we're going to make everything that goes, of course, and that is why Will is and the team he is part of, we're going to make it fully transparent, that you can see fully transparent, aggregated, or at the detailed level, not at the personal level, what happens with your money, which in a way that you can see it very tangible. But the reality is that most people don't want it. I think The reason why we come to the US with our HQ, and then I'll stop about that. There are two reasons that you see in the US. One, the efficiency is massive. It's even bigger than in Europe. The inefficiency, that's what you are pointing on, the printing money idea. It's massive. It's bigger than Europe. And we are highly refined in that. But secondly, I have never come across an American in my life that doesn't understand at least a little bit being patriotic and taking care of your country, because it's entrenched in your education system. Everybody who went at least 12 years to the school in the US has it as a value set, much more than in any part of the rest of the world, because it's not part of our curriculum. That is why we want to go there, because if we first need to crack the US problem, which is how with a big mindset like that, and excuse me my wording, can you fuck up massively what you do with the money? That is what I can't get my head around it. We here have the systems, but we don't have the mindset.
Excuse me for just a moment. You pick up that thread in a second, but we've reached the end of our official hour. All right.
Okay.
So for those people who want to depart, we want to thank you for joining us and for our guests.